Hello there, and welcome to a new episode of the Fluent English Pro podcast. My name is David Perez, your host, and today we are going to talk about what is easier. Is it easier to learn English, or is it easier to learn your native language? Because sometimes we might think English is a difficult language to learn, but we do not realize our own native language is also difficult to learn, and we have mastered it nevertheless. Yes, of course, because we live in a country where that language is spoken, and because we have been exposed to it for a long time. That's an obvious matter, but that shows that complexity in this case doesn't affect our capacity to learn a new language. What makes a language difficult? What is the basis to say a language is more difficult than other to understand or to speak? Well, a lot of it, not everything, but a lot of it depends on how similar your native language is to English. The closer it is, the most similar it is, the easier is going to be to learn English for you. For example, let's take Spanish, Italian, and French. And Portuguese, of course. Spanish, Italian, French, and Portuguese. So all these languages are related. They come from Latin. But as a Spanish speaker, it is easier for you to read a text in Portuguese or to read a text in Italian, even if you don't speak these languages, because the vocabulary tends to be very similar and the grammar tends to be very similar. In the particular case of Italian and Portuguese, sometimes even the pronunciation and grammar structures are very similar. So this means that because these languages are close to each other, it is easy to understand, and thus, usually, it is easier to learn them. But that is not always the case. For example, if we have Spanish and French, even though they belong to the same family of languages, the pronunciation is very different. And sometimes the vocabulary is very different as well, meaning learning French or understanding French might represent a bit more difficulty than learning Italian or Portuguese. Same happens with English. You have other languages that are related to English. I think maybe one of the closest ones is German. Yeah, because those are both Germanic languages. So they share aspects in terms of pronunciation, for example, and sounds, and maybe grammar, even though I think German might be way more complicated than English. So that is the first thing. Okay, so I have compared Spanish and Italian and French, and you're saying, okay, but we are talking about English. In this case, then we need to be aware of English in terms of how close it is to your native language. And I will say, even though it might be very different from your native language, it is still a relatively simple language when it comes to vocabulary and grammar. Pronunciation might represent a bit of difficulty depending on like what basis or what reference you have, and because sometimes pronunciation in English is not consistent. But in terms of grammar and vocabulary, I think it is rather simple in structure. And I would like to make an emphasis here on the importance of English in comparison, for example, to you learning other languages, which is okay, by the way, which is amazing if you are learning other languages. But in terms of work and in terms of business, you should always aim to learn or to master a global language. A global language. In this case, English has a global reach, and so does Spanish, and so does French, and so does Mandarin, for example. It's not restricted to English only, but it's important that you think of a language that is going to be useful for you in multiple scenarios, in multiple places, in multiple cases. What we call a lingua franca, yes, a language that is used by speakers of different languages so they can understand each other. I'm gonna make some examples here with my native language, which is Spanish, yeah, to show sometimes why a language might be easier or harder to learn than English. So here, if we compare Spanish with English, Spanish grammar is way more complicated, is way more complex than English grammar. Starting with, for example, gendered nouns. Yes, you have male and female nouns. Even like if you are speaking about an object, some objects are male or some are female in the grammar. You also have the conjugation of verbs. Yes, you have a lot of verbs, a lot of tenses, and you have a lot of different variations for each one of the conjugations and each one of the tenses. So it's a lot. It's a lot. Whereas in English, for example, most nouns are not gendered and most verbs have kind of a similar structure for conjugation and sometimes they repeat, yeah, across different pronouns. Yes, for example, if you say I eat and then we eat, the word eat stays the same. Whereas in Spanish, you say yo como, yes, but then you will say nosotros comemos. So that como and comemos, there is a change. And there is also a change if you're speaking about he, about she, about they. It's going to be different. That's a lot of information to process if you're learning Spanish. On the other hand, there are also challenges Spanish speakers face when learning English. One of them is pronunciation, because English is not from Latin roots, or well, part of it, but most of it is from Germanic roots. So pronunciation varies from that of Spanish. And also, you have the difference between writing and speaking, because writing in Spanish, the way you write, practically resembles the exact way you pronounce words. Yet writing corresponds a lot to the phonetics of the language. Not 100%, but it corresponds a lot to the phonetics of the Spanish language, which doesn't necessarily happen in English. Sometimes you have things that are very phonetical, but some other things are based on context, based on intention, or even based on accent. Yes, for example, in English, you have the word vase or vase. The spelling is the same, the meaning is exactly the same. The difference is vase is the American English pronunciation, and then vase is the British English pronunciation. But it's the same spelling, is the same object, same meaning. Yeah. And you can add to that, of course, sounds that do not exist in Spanish. And the other thing is idioms and phrasal verbs. Well, idioms, I think, are common and are always a challenge no matter the language, because they change with time, with age, with location, with context. In this case, if you're speaking about like industry specific idioms, they are going to change depending on the industry. If you are in health, you're going to have particular idioms there. If you are in tech, you're going to have particular idioms there. So there's going to be a lot of variation. And the other is phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs are not a thing in Spanish. They are not a thing in Spanish. And sometimes they are confusing because the components of a phrasal verb might indicate a meaning, but in actuality, the meaning is different. Yeah, so that might be confusing for a beginner or an intermediate learner of English whose native language is Spanish. Challenges for people who have English as a native language, yeah, and they want to learn Spanish. The one I already mentioned is verb conjugation. Verb conjugation in Spanish is very complex, very extensive. There are a lot of variations, there are a lot of tenses, there are a lot of everything. It is so complex. You also have gendered nouns, as I already mentioned. And for example, you have the difference between formal and informal speech. Yes, you have in English, you say, you have a new house. You have a new house. Yes. Either if you're speaking to a friend or to a stranger, you're going to use you, the pronoun you. But in Spanish, we have formal and informal you. We have tú, which is informal, and then we have usted, which is formal for you. So sometimes for a non-native speaker, it is tough to differentiate when to use which form and how that works best. And this even happens to native Spanish speakers because depending on the city, depending on the region, depending on the culture, sometimes using the informal form is widely accepted, but in other cities, using the informal form is not accepted in many cases. Yeah. In my local city, for example, in my city, it is extremely common to use the informal tú with strangers. But in other cities, if you use the informal tú with a stranger, they're gonna get mad. They're gonna be angry at you. Yeah, they're gonna see that as impolite or disrespectful. So it's a tricky thing. It is a tricky thing. Okay, so as we noticed, learning English as a foreign language or as a second language might not be actually that difficult. Every language represents some level of difficulty, all of them. And that level of difficulty can be higher or lower depending on what your own native language is. That's only one factor, of course, and there are so many other factors, such as age, such as your innate skills, such as exposure, formal education, etc., etc. So, like, there are a lot of other things that influence that process. Overall, what I want to say is, if you think, "Oh my God, like English is so hard, I don't want to try this," or "I'm really struggling with this," yes, all languages have things that are easy, and all languages, including your native language, has things that are hard to do and hard to learn. It happens to everyone. So that challenge is part of the process. Embrace it, accept it, enjoy it. What can you do about that? So first, accept that like sometimes some aspects of the language are going to be harder to work on, and then you can focus on working on that aspect. If you are having challenges with certain aspects of the language, it is important that you have a tutor, that you have a mentor or a teacher helping you with that. It is way better, easier, more effective than trying to do it on your own. The other aspect is exposure. Exposure is critical, it's essential for you to be able to comprehend and communicate in a different language. Yes, watching videos, going to conversation clubs, listening to podcasts, reading books, every possible way in which you can be in contact with the other language is going to help you advance and have a better level. In this case, in the English language. And the next tip is just enjoy the process. Enjoy the process, continue learning, don't give up. This is a long way. I think this is a never ending road. It is a never ending road because even as a native speaker in your native language, you always continue to learn new vocabulary, new stuff. Same happens in English. So don't think of learning English as a point of arrival or as a destination. It is a journey. It's a journey. And it is a journey very similar to that of people learning your native language. Yeah. Whether your native language is Spanish or Mandarin or Italian or Portuguese or Japanese or Tagalog, they are also going through that process. And there are easy parts and there are challenging parts. So embrace that and enjoy that part. Great. That is all for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed and that you have a new perspective on how difficult or how easy it is to learn English. And I would like you to be subscribed to our YouTube channel if you haven't subscribed yet. So please hit subscribe and activate the notification bell. And also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, you can find us there. And Instagram and TikTok. Also find us on those social media platforms. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and see you in the next one. Goodbye.